Welcome to Legal Lines. My name is Tom O'Shea, the host of this program, and my guest today is attorney Leigh Dalton. Leigh is the director of the York County Truancy Prevention Initiative.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Welcome, Leigh.
Thank you.
And the Legal Lines, by the way, is brought to you by the York County Bar Foundation. The York County Bar Foundation, in many ways, helped form the York County Truancy Prevention Initiative, and Leigh was previously a guest. We talked about the work of the Truancy Prevention Initiative, which, as the title suggests, is designed so that children are not truant from school. And what we talked about over 2 years ago was a summit that was being planned with respect to truancy prevention.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about what happened at that summit and what was created as a result of that summit.
Okay. Well, one of the main purposes of the summit was to gather feedback from the parents, the teachers, and the students. Because Judge John C. Euler had started the Truancy Task Force in the mid-90s, and he held those task force meetings, which we still have to this day, every other month at the Judicial Center during lunch breaks on a Thursday. But that sort of leaves out some crucial partners, which are the students, the parents, and the teachers who are, in class during the day or at work. So part of the summit was to gather feedback and perspective from these folks about what they thought about truancy prevention, what we could be doing. And we had a panel of 9th graders, 10th graders, basically high school students at the summit, and a lot of them had dropped out and re-engaged themselves. Some of them had had chronic truant behavior before. But most of them had re-engaged and were on their way to graduation, if not already graduated. And they all indicated that the 9th grade was the hardest year for them, that was the year that they could have been a straight A student in middle school, 7th and 8th grade. They could have been completely engaged in school. But that transition to the 9th grade was the real difficult part. So they suggested, as we moved forward with our activities for truancy prevention, that we really focus on that 9th grade. Speaking from our data, actually, that is the largest percentage of truant students in York County as well, in the 9th grade. A fifth of our 9th grade students are truant around the county. So when we were looking at programs that we could implement, that's where the Youth Court Alliance seemed like a good idea, which is the idea of having peers hold their peers accountable for their truant behavior. And we focused it in the first year at William Penn for the 9th graders.
Okay, so this was the idea of a youth court.
Yes.
Is what we're going to focus on here.
Yes.
A youth court is something that is designed to deal with the problem of truancy.
Ours is. There are actually youth courts around the nation that focus either on school discipline, some of which is truancy, but there are plenty of youth courts around the nation that focus on first-time nonviolent offenses for juvenile crimes.
All right, let's talk in general. What is a youth court?
Okay, a youth court, it can have a variety of different ways of being set up, but in general, it is youth holding other youth, their peers, accountable for certain types of behavior. So for truancy court, we have a youth jury. We have, in our model, we have students who play the role of a youth lawyer. We call them a youth representative. We have a youth playing the role of judge, bailiff, and then we have a jury foreperson, which is really important to keep the jury on task and together. And then we also have what we call a youth ally, who holds the hand of the student after they leave the court to make sure that they complete their consequence.
So everyone in this process is a student?
Yes, for the most part. We do have what we call attorney advisors or an adult advisor there at each hearing. But for the most part, the ideas emanate from the youth. They've all been trained. They go through 2 months of training at the beginning of the year, each year. For our truancy purposes, they learn how truant behavior can affect the community, how it can affect schools, families, and the youth themselves. They learn about balanced and restorative justice, which is the idea of using the law to help bring people back to the way they were before they committed the crime or the offense, rather than punishing them so that they might not want to be re-engaged in what they're doing again.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about exactly what happens with the youth court with respect to truancy and how it functions in York County. But for right now, with the youth court itself, which it sounds like it's student-run,
Yes.
but there's an adult supervisor?
Yes.
Is that a teacher or an attorney, or is there one of each? Or
Well, we always have an adult there. That is actually, I have two folks that work for me. They're AmeriCorps members donated by the United Way of York County, who sort of coordinate the program. And they deal with the families that call. They do all the scheduling and whatnot. And they do go to the hearings, and so they're there. But we actually partner with the York County Bar Association. We have about 6 attorneys who volunteer their time, and they come to the hearings, and they help in a variety of ways, helping the jury form questions that they could ask the respondent or the participant, working with the youth representative on the opening and closing statements and how to truly represent the family in the matter. So at the very least, we have 2 adults at every hearing.
okay, and one is an attorney.
One is an attorney.
And sometimes the attorney is you,
Sometimes it is.
and
yes.
sometimes it's one of the volunteer attorneys who assist with the program.
Correct. Yes.
And you pointed out something that I neglected in our opening, and that is you mentioned the United Way,
Yes.
how you partner with the United Way.
Yes.
Let's explain the United Way's involvement with the Truancy Prevention Initiative.
Okay. Well, and back again to the summit. After we had the summit and we looked at some of the activities that the community in York wanted us to tackle, we realized that my current position of 15 hours a week as a consultant out of the Bar Foundation was not really enough to get the job done. So during some more planning sessions, United Way was already involved. They have been a partner with this for 3 or 4 years. And we talked with them and we said, really, if we move to United Way, that's where all the partnerships are. That's where we can really work with the community agencies on focusing, to get the students back into school. So we officially moved as an initiative of the United Way in July of 2011, we being the staff of one, myself. And so I am now housed there. I have an office there. I am a United Way staff member. But there's a very close partnership with the Bar Foundation, and they continue to contribute in money, but as well as in their attorneys for some of the endeavors that we partake anyway.
Okay, so to plug the Bar Foundation,
Yes.
which brings you legal lines, by the way. If we were to plug the Bar Foundation, a grant from the Bar Foundation started this project.
Yes.
At least started it. I mean, I realized that there was a core group of people
Yes.
who were meeting before there was any funding, etc. But once the funding was needed, the Bar Foundation came forward to basically start the initial funding for the program.
Yes, and the funding as well as the office space and a lot of the in-kind, the stuff that you need to operate a business on a small level.
So,
yeah.
so the office space was provided, and some staff time,
Yes.
but stationary, etc. Then, after this summit that was approximately 2 years ago, the United Way basically took over.
Yes.
Okay, and now your office is at the United Way.
Yes.
And you have much more resources than the Bar Foundation was able to provide, but the Bar Foundation is still providing some funding for the program.
Right.
And we're very proud of the fact that
Yes.
we have done this, because there's been some great success with respect to this initiative.
Yes.
I mean, the truancy rates in York County have dropped significantly from what they were only 2 years ago, as I understand it.
Yeah, back in 2006, 2007, we were ranked 9th in the state for truancy, which you don't want to be ranked high. We don't want to be the first in the state, nor do we really want to be 9th. And last year's truancy ranks show that we are now 21st in the state, the 21st ranked county. So
Okay.
we are decreasing it.
And just in general, one of the reasons why the Bar Foundation took up truancy prevention as a project is because many legal problems
Yes.
later develop that could be linked to people who were once truant students.
Certainly, yes.
Okay? Crime, for example, dropout rates, lack of employable skills due
Yeah.
to dropout, etc.,
Yeah.
all stem from the early age for truancy. One of the things that I learned involved in the project was I always assumed that truancy was a teenage problem that existed mainly when you had teenagers who didn't want to go to school.
In one door, out the other. You
Right.
drop them off, they don't stay. Yeah.
That's what I assumed. But
Right.
I found out Truancy begins at kindergarten.
Yeah.
And it's something that's not just a city problem, but it's a problem in virtually every school district across the county.
State, really.
State,
yeah.
Nation, probably.
Yeah.
But this is something that happens even with very young children, and sometimes it's the parents' fault.
Right.
That they just don't think school's important, or it's important that they go every day.
Right.
And so this is a widespread problem, and as you pointed out, we have significantly made a dent in that problem with this program.
Right.
Okay, so we're very proud of this, by the way, if you can't tell. But let's talk a little bit about before the Youth Court Alliance that was established. What would happen traditionally to a student who was truant?
Okay. Well, and I should say that there are plenty of districts around our county that don't have the program yet. We are in 3 districts. So for schools that don't have the Youth Court Alliance, what happens is the student misses more than 4 days of school. So at the 4th unlawful day, that is when the school will send the family a citation saying, your child has missed unlawfully for 4 days. When
that doesn't have to be consecutive days, does it?
No, not necessarily.
So if the child misses 4 days where there isn't a legal excuse, the child was sick or something like that.
I'm going to insert a huge disclaimer. I am an attorney, right? So the disclaimer is every school district actually determines their own policies and procedures, and there's 500 school districts. So I'm saying this very generally, but for the most part, the citation is sent at any 4th unlawful, does not have to be consecutive. So the family will receive the citation, and they can either plead guilty and pay the fine, or they can plead not guilty. And if they plead not guilty, they have to go to the magisterial district court in their district, and they are given the opportunity to explain why they feel that they are not guilty for the truancy citation. The school does arrive at that hearing as well and presents the data that they have on their end as to why they feel that that family is truant. And what the parent can do is sort of show the evidence, like say you are the parent that's dropping your child off every day and your child's leaving the school. For that parent, it's really not fair for them to be fined. So they would be able to prove to the judge and say, listen, this is what I'm doing. I work at 7:30. I drop my child off at 7 every day. And then the judge might transfer that citation down to the child if they are 13 years or older. Under Pennsylvania law, you can shift the citation from the parent to the child if the parent proves that they've been responsible in trying to alleviate the truant behavior.
So if the child was under 13, the parent would be fined.
Regardless.
That's the end of the story.
Yeah, and that's where children and youth tends to be a little bit more involved because they're working with the family on family management. And certainly if you have a child who's 11 or 12 and is going into the school and leaving the school, that's probably even more alarming that they're so young and that they're not somehow attending school regularly. If it is this child's fault at that young of an age, it really is sort of a concern. I mean, when you're older, I think it's more expected that the child might, have something else going on.
But if it's an older child, then 13 or older, if the parent can establish that it's not the parent's fault, if the parent does everything that's humanly possible to get the child to school and the child doesn't go, the fine will then be transferred to the child? Right.
And it doesn't have to be a fine. There's not too many resources for those magistrates. I mean, they can do community service. The student can do community service, but that also assumes that the magistrate knows of community service opportunities. And that's another, actually, avenue of the Truancy Prevention Initiative is to help find those avenues of alternatives to fines for the child.
We're almost out of time for the first segment. We'll be back, talk much more about the Youth Court Alliance with my guest, Leigh Dalton. This is Legal Lines. Welcome back to Legal Lines. My guest today is attorney Leigh Dalton, who is the director of the York County Truancy Prevention Initiative.
Hello.
And we are talking about the programs involved in order to prevent truancy. And the main program that we're going to focus on now is the Youth Court Alliance.
Yes.
And in the first segment, we talked a little bit about the traditional way that a student or the student's family is fined if there's truancy, if the child is illegally absent for a number of times. But now there's an alternative plan that some school districts have put into place.
Yes.
And which school districts in York County are using this plan right now?
The school district of the City of York, Southeastern School District, and Hanover Public School District.
Okay, and that's 3 school districts right now. Is there any goal to expand it?
I mean, I think it would be great to expand. It sort of depends on funding, but we also want to get these ones down really pat, and then we'll think about
the pilot
moving.
programs.
Yes, these are.
And I understand that York City was the very first.
Yes, last year.
So it's been operating the longest in York City.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, now with the Youth Court Alliance, can you explain what this is?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, youth court is the idea that peers are acting as the jury to decide what types of consequences that truant youth can receive in lieu of fines. The fact that we call it an alliance is the idea that for most of the consequences that the students offer, they really relate to the community in some way. They might send that child to a community after-school program. They might send the family to a county-wide family management program. But the idea is to say, not all the solutions to the problem remain even within the school, but sometimes you have to look out to the community and ask for their help as well.
Okay. So if there was a student who was truant, which I believe means an illegal absence generally more than 4 times?
Yes, yes.
And that would be in any particular school year?
Yes.
And generally they would get a notice from the court, a district magistrate court, saying that charges have been brought against the student for truancy.
Correct.
And now if the school district offers the youth court, they can opt out of going to the magistrate court.
Yes.
If they agree to comply with the youth court requirements. Is that it?
That is it.
All right. Now, if they agree to comply with the youth court requirements, are they automatically admitting that they were truant?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, youth court is more of a sentencing court rather than it is, a determination of guilt or innocence, if you will. When they come to the court, they are admitting that they were truant, but they also concede that they would like to give back to their community or do jury duty or do some sort of alternative to receiving a fine. And this really helps, I think, because traditionally the citation actually falls to the parent first. And a lot of times the parents feel that they have done what they can and they don't want to pay the fine and they don't feel that it's what they should be doing if it's the child's fault. But also it helps because, at 13 years old, if you did have a fine placed against you, where would you be finding the money? It actually ends up being the parent that pays even when it is brought against the child. So this helps in the instance where there is no money to pay the fine and the child has to take that responsibility and does give back and does sort of pay for the offense, but not necessarily with money.
Okay, so now is the youth court that exists in these 3 school districts, is it at all grade levels or is it geared towards certain grade levels?
At William Penn High School, senior high school in the city, it is in the 9th and 10th grades. At Kenderdale High School, it will be in the entire high school. And then for Hanover, it's at the middle school.
Okay, so there are different grades at different schools.
Yeah.
I think there's also a requirement, you told me before the show started, that once a child is a certain age, they
Yes.
cannot be adjudicated truant?
Yeah, so generally speaking, truancy is when a child is missing school without a lawful excuse. In Pennsylvania, the compulsory age to attend schools is the age of 8 to the age of 16, or from the time you enter first grade. So when a child turns 17, while they may still be required due to graduation requirements to attend school, they are no longer legally required to attend school, and they may sign themselves out. So a child who's truant at 7, or a child who is missing school unlawfully at 17 is actually not truant and cannot be brought to court for such a purpose.
Okay. So, but going back to the child under the age of 17, 16 or below, who is truant, if they fall within the jurisdiction of one of these youth courts in the school district where they have the youth court alternative, they can opt out of the magisterial court and agree that they were truant and have the penalty imposed by basically a panel of their peers.
Correct.
Other students.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
Does this require the permission of the student's parent?
Yes. And again, because the citation actually is falling to the parent receives what we call the option letter, and the parent has basically 5 business days to call in and to accept that option. We do have parents that don't call for whatever reason, and that's fine. But when the parent and the child actually meet before the hearing and they agree that they're agreeing that they're truant, but that they're going to accept consequences from a jury of peers. And so both the parent and the student have to sort of initialize on those elements to make sure that they agree to this process.
Okay, so let's say that this is a student's been truant, receives the citation, opts out of going to district magistrate court, agrees to go to the youth court. Is there a hearing of some sort that's held right at the school?
Yes. So they do the intake process before the hearing takes place, like maybe a week beforehand. Then when they arrive, the student and the parent meet with what we call the youth representative, basically the lawyer role, who's a student, and they meet in a separate room, and they suggest to the youth representative what they feel they should receive as consequences. It might sound like that's maybe not a real punishment if they get to choose, but it's a mere suggestion to the jury. It's certainly not going to necessarily happen, but it also is a way for the youth representative to hear right directly from the student some of their strengths, some of their weaknesses, what they feel they could work on, what they want to be in life, so that the representative can really create an opening statement for the hearing process that lets the jury see inside the life of the child and the parent. And there might be details that come to light that weren't really available before. And then then the jury also, they have a sort of a questionnaire in front of them that the parent and student have filled out, and they read that, and they get to sort of generate the questions ahead of time so that they're prepared to ask the questions. And then when the hearing begins, the student sits sort of at a chair in the front of the building. And I will say some of the magistrates do offer their courtrooms in some of the districts, which is a great help. And this jury just basically stands up and asks questions of the student, and then they get to ask the questions of the parents as well.
How long does this process generally last?
Half an hour for English-speaking students and families, and then we actually do cater to some of the Spanish-speaking families as well. It takes about 45 minutes because we have translation back and forth.
Okay, and the jury are other students.
Yes.
And they're asking questions to do this, and then what? The jury makes the determination of what penalty the student should have?
Yeah, and I should say, I think I mentioned at the first half of the segment, that the jury goes through a lot of training. They learn, again, how truancy affects the larger community, the schools, the families, and the students themselves. They learn about some of the theories behind it. But I also really emphasize to them that the reason that they're the jury of peers, because they are actually making it to school in spite of some of the rules that may be prohibiting attendance from these other students. If we talk about a really short passing period where kids are so frustrated that they only have 3 minutes to get from one class to the other, or that there's certain curriculum that all the kids have to follow, and it can be frustrating. Well, if you use that as your excuse as a truant student, you're sitting in front of a jury, literally, of your peers who are somehow navigating the system and making it there in spite of those frustrations. And so it really is supposed to be, a peer pressure on the one hand. The jury does pressure the student, but it's also sort of peer mentoring and understanding and saying, yes, I know exactly how you feel, but this is how I do it myself.
Okay, and I believe you said earlier that one of the punishments, if you will, is to be on the jury.
Yes.
Okay, so is it therefore my understanding that most of the jurors are in fact students who had previously been Truant.
Well, maybe not most, but towards the end of again, William Penn was our first year last year, our first year doing this. And towards the end of that school year, at one point, I think we might have had half the students that were on jury duty, and then the other half were, official members, as we call them. At that point, towards the spring part of that year, I actually brought in some youth training from Leadership York came in to do some training on how to make sure that they're doing some real group consensus and group decision making. It's a skill maybe not even all adults have. But to say, you mention a possible consequence. Well, if only 2 people say sure, do the other 8 people or 9 people agree? If not everyone's really voicing their opinion, then it's not really a group decision now, is it? So we have done a lot of work with the jury 4 people, I guess. They sort of lead the jury process, and we make sure that they understand how to bring in, especially those on jury duty who may not know what's going on, they may feel bored. But I will say we've had plenty of kids that have done jury duty who have expressed an interest in coming back, and actually we do have one student who was a truant youth last year. He's now an official youth court member this year because he really enjoys the process.
Okay. Now, one of the other things, there are various reasons for truancy, and some of them are legitimate.
Yeah, that's what I call
Could you
them,
give an
legitimate.
example of a legitimate reason to be truant?
Sure. Everyone understands the economy, right? Not all the jobs that some of these families can have put all the food on the plate and pay the rent and mortgage, and sometimes the family has to ask that child to work an extra job. And maybe the job is typically at night, but every once in a while they need to cover a shift and they're missing the school for the day. Unless you have official permission from the school district, that's not a legitimate excuse. Again, because of work reasons, there might be young ones at home that are not going to school. There's no money to pay for childcare. Who has to take care of it? Take care of the children? That sibling has to miss school in order to take care of the family. So those are what I call them legitimate. They're just unfortunately not lawful reasons, under
still
the policies.
Illegal.
Yeah, it's still illegal. It's just certainly not, it's certainly legitimate, though.
Then there are other reasons that clearly are not legitimate.
Yeah, and those are, well, I should say, too, there are reasons that some of the kids are missing, but I would argue that at some point there was a reason why the child disengaged. And let's say that maybe they had a learning disability that went undiagnosed, or maybe they are being bullied. I mean, it's a classic example these days. I think, we need to define what bullying is. But I think that there are many circumstances that kids, maybe younger on, in elementary and middle, they experienced some bad times, and they didn't go to school enough then, and now they fell behind, and now they go back to school and they feel just totally out of place.
So in this written statement that is filled out by the student and the student's parents, they can address these issues. The jury can then focus on these issues, and then the punishment
can be catered
to that.
Yes. And
some of these punishments might actually be programs designed to help the student.
Yes. For instance, if I go back to the example of bullying, in New York City, there's a program called Stick and Move. It's a boxing program that's after school, free of charge, takes place at Devers, and that we've used. Actually, it was one of our first cases last year. It was a child who he admitted. He said, I have some anger management issues. I was bullied when I was younger, and I have a short fuse. So the jury recommended he go there.
We're only going to have a few seconds left, but is the program successful?
Yes, it is.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. This is Legal Lines. My guest was Leigh Dalton. The Legal Lines has been brought to you by the York County Bar Foundation. Thank you.